Hey guys, how's it going? Mr. Young here. We're going to do our first flipped classroom lesson today, and it's going to be on ballistics. But to get you guys interested, I figured I'd go outside and shoot off a couple rounds, because it is a beautiful weekend day outside. So we'll see you outside in a couple minutes. How you doing, ladies and gentlemen? This week we're going to be starting a lessons on ballistics, and we're going to be using all of that ballistic evidence for processing our ballistics lab from our crime scene, which we did at the homicide at Seasons. But to make this a little interesting, I thought we'd come outside and actually shoot off a couple rounds first. And I'm actually going to do it with my personal firearm. Here we go. Alright, we're back inside now, and I will tell you, it is a little colder outside than I thought it was. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a lesson on ballistics, and specifically how it relates to the ballistic evidence which we may have found at the crime scene in the homicide at Seasons. So with that, please, at this time, you're going to need a lot of this information. Get some paper, pen, have it out, ready to go. Notes. Remember, during the flipped classroom, you could stop, pause at any time, rewind, jot down some notes. I will tell you this, that you will have to answer a few questions in class tomorrow, and I really want you to think about what we found as evidence and all of the stuff that I'm going to go over in this video to help you answer the questions tomorrow in class. So what we're going to be talking about in this lesson is basically anything that will help us get to find what is important in ballistic fingerprinting. So by doing that, what we're going to first take a look at is we're going to look at the nomenclature of firearms. I will tell you right now, I'm not going to go through every firearm. I'm just going to choose one. I'm actually going to choose one of the Glock models. We'll go through that. And I'm not going to go into the trigger or parts of the trigger. What I'm really going to focus on is what's going to make that bullet and ignite the gunpowder. So talking about that, we're also going to go over the nomenclature of the bullet itself, which will lead us into discovering what kind of caliber a bullet may be. Also, that will relate to the size of the barrel as well. One of the things that we definitely need to cover is the whole process, and I've broken it down to a 4-step process for what makes the bullet actually travel and go out the end of the projectile. So some questions you want to have in the back of your head are, how are ballistics used as evidence? That's number one. Anything that you think about, and I go over in the nomenclature on these firearms and with the bullets, you should have in your head, how is that going to be used as evidence? And what does it help you explain? So we're going to get a lot of that from just looking at the nomenclature of each specific firearm. So before we get into ballistics, I just want to talk a little bit about the history of both guns and as well as gunpowder. So we do have gunpowder was actually invented in the 9th century in China, which is where it came from. But most of those was used for... they were actually searching for ways to heal the body. So it was sort of an accident that was discovered. So as we progress through history, the first type of firearm that was used was a muzzle-loading matchlock. They also used wicks, as you see here in the one area, in this one here. We also, after that, they went to different types of firearms that used breech or locking devices. And with that, the bullets were not the same that we had today. Most of them were round, made of whatever metal or lead that they could find. One of the major advances that we come to is actually the invention of rifling. What rifling did was it created a twist, and it was in the barrel. So when the bullet was in there, it was of a specific size, one barrel, and that twist actually did something. Created a spiral, like a football, onto the bullet so that it had much better accuracy. So then, of course, after that, we had the invention of the revolver, semi-automatic, automatic handguns that we're maybe used to seeing today. So here we go. The Glock firearm. The Glock firearm actually is actually not an American-made gun. It was actually produced in Austria. It is the #1 firearm used by law enforcement. It actually captures about 65% of the total market share for firearms used by police. The next thing, if we take one of those Glocks apart, you'll see these are the major components. The slide, this is actually a different one broken down, just so you know it's actually a Glock 30, not the 21. But the slide, you have the barrel, the spring, which is the recoil spring, you see that in yellow there, the trigger, the ejector pin. The ejector pin is important. I have it in red because it is something that we will focus on, as well as the extractor, which is also in red. So the things in yellow you see on this are things I'm not necessarily going to cover, but in the red are items that will change a ballistic fingerprint. So if we first look at the barrel on the Glock 21 is only 4 inches long. The one that you saw me in the video, I actually have a Glock 27, which has a 3-inch barrel. It's really much shorter. They are produced from a single piece of metal, and they're manufactured down to include, inside the barreling, is the lands and grooves. What they do, that produces a spiral on the bullet as it exits the chamber. The barrel they drill into the center of it with a drill, which would produce those. The next thing we're going to cover is the breech and the firing pin. If we go back to the slide where you thought about the slide itself, the breech is actually in the slide. It's the back portion of the slide. If you see that circle there in the middle, you'll see the round that surrounds the pin. That's actually what the butt of the cartridge or the shell casing will actually sit up against. So, and you see in the middle there's a little firing pin. That's the firing pin that comes out and actually hits the primer on the bullet. So different weapons, you'll see this one here actually is a little different, is a little worn. It's a close-up. If you look at the bottom of it, it's more rounded than it is pointed. Here's a little closer look where you could still see the breech here on this one right there is the breech. But I want to focus on something called the extractor. The extractor is the piece that will, on semi-automatics, that will actually grab the rim on the shell casing so that it can start to be pulled out of the chamber itself inside the barrel. So that's an important part. It is just a little tiny metal piece, and I do have it circled there in red. Alright, the next part I'm going to talk about here is the ejector pin. And this is actually the frame of the gun, and if you're looking down in this section right here, that's actually where the magazine would come up in. But the part we're focusing on for this is this ejector pin right here, that metal piece. What the ejector pin does is it actually removes the casing, shell casing, and it forces it out the ejector port, which is the hole in the side of the slide that we saw earlier. Just so that you could get a reference as to where this is too. On this one here, this is just part of the trigger right here that goes in that actually causes the firing pin to go off inside the slide. Alright, here we go with the nomenclature of the bullet, or the cartridge is actually the best way to say it. If you look at the top portion, that's the metal bullet itself. That could just be made of lead, like target ammo, or you could have full metal jackets, which are usually encased in metal. The brass, also known as the bullet case itself, that is the part we've located inside the crime scene. At the bottom of the cartridge, there is a little rim. That's actually what the ejector pin will hit. So you might see something on that. And then, of course, on the very bottom, there's a little round circle. This is actually a center fire. There is a primer, and that primer ignites and goes through a flash hole, and the flash hole will ignite the propellant or the gunpowder. One thing is that it's important to know is that gunpowder actually doesn't explode. It just burns very, very fast, and in that burning, it produces a lot of gas, and the gas expands, and as it expands, it forces the bullet down the barrel. The bullet takes the path of least resistance. So at that same time where the bullet is now traveling down the barrel, what is happening to the shell casing? The casing is actually traveling in the opposite direction. So it's traveling out where it hits the ejector pin and then goes out the ejector port. What we're going to talk about for the next couple slides is what actually happens when the firing pin strikes the cartridge. Well, the firing pin actually strikes the thing called the primer. The type of round which I showed you was actually a center fire primer. And that primer powder ignites and goes through a flash hole. Once the primer powder sparks, it goes through the flash hole and then it ignites the main propellant, the gunpowder. The burning gunpowder starts to create gases, and those gases expand. And with that expansion, it builds up pressure, and it actually forces the bullet down the barrel. As the bullet starts to go down the barrel, it follows those lands and grooves, creating a spiraling motion until it exits the tip of the firearm. One thing I want to add to this, at the same time that this is happening, remember what's happening to that cartridge. The cartridge, the shell casing, rather, is actually being ejected out the ejector port. There you go, you have the firing process. Not too hard when you take and break it down as simple little parts. One thing I do want to cover before we go is actually how bullets get their names and how they are identified. Bullets are identified from their caliber. As you see here, there's a wide range of different types of shells and ammunition, and all of them actually get their name based on the diameter of the shell casing and the cartridge itself. We've already gone over how to use calipers, but now we're actually going to use them to measure the bullets that we found, the shell casings rather, that we found in our crime scene. Okay, now that we've gone over everything, let's just review for a couple seconds. Remember, you need to know that the bullet will take on the patterns of the lands and grooves. You need to know that the caliper is the measurement of the diameter of the cartridge. You'll need to remember the four-step process of how the firearm works. And things that I'm going to be asking you about tomorrow is the firing pin, the breech block, the extractor, and the ejector marks from the ejector pin. So is anybody interested in seeing how I ended up on the range today? Well, really in the backyard? Alright, let's see it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there we go. Ballistics, ballistic evidence, and hopefully you get some information out of this and we can use it to help solve our crime. Well, towards the beginning of this, actually, we went over, you saw me go outside for some shooting. And did anybody know how many shots I shot? Well, let's take it back to the outside video, and I'll see you in class tomorrow. So I do have a question for you. Anybody have any estimates on how many rounds I shot? Alright, we'll go up and take a look. Come on. Just so you know, this was actually from 15 yards out. It's actually a lot further than most police-involved firearm shootings. But we do have a good grouping here. I did shoot 6 rounds. All 6 would have qualified from that 15 yards, and I have a pretty good grouping on the first 4 right here. Alright, thanks for watching the video, and I hope you enjoyed and learned something.